Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Connecting Dots podcast. As usual, this is your host Usama here, and today we're joined by Tiffany Aziz, all the way from Stockholm, Sweden. She is an employer branding specialist, and today we'll get into a discussion with her and explore what is it like to be in such a role, and we'll get to know more about her as a person as well. So, with that, I formally welcome you to the show, Tiffany. How has your day been so far?
Very good, actually. Thank you so much, Osama, and thank you for having me on the show. This is such a pleasure.
So with that, first of all, Tiffany, share an elevator pitch of your professional journey with us. How had it been, and how was the journey overall?
The elevator pitch to that is that wouldn't be really of an elevator pitch, but you could say that when I graduated back in 2016 with a bachelor's in event management from business school in Scotland, I thought that I was going to become a wedding planner. And I sort of slid into this. I was sliding in through the doors of various tech companies and then into this role. And back then I had never even realized what employer branding was. And here I am today. So I think the elevator pitch in short would be there's just these turn of events that happened over the course of the past 7 years that led me here. And thankfully so.
Yeah, excellent. And right now, the position that you're in, what's the most interesting aspect of it for you?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's a big question in itself. I mean, I always describe to people when they ask me, so what do you actually do? Like, what does an employer branding specialist do? And I always give them the short answer, which is, my job is to make an unsexy company seem very sexy to future employees. So it's about taking a product that you could use in everyday, like people associate things with the brands depending on what function they fill in society. So let's take construction as one sort of brand, or we can talk about tech as another sort of brand. And then third, we can talk about fashion as a third option of brands, but they all come with their all different associations, right? And my job is to make these jobs that these brands need seem really super attractive and super sexy. That's basically what I do.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. So in that regard, I do have a bunch of questions for you, but let's go one by one. So first of all, as far as the visual branding is concerned, so how does your role factor in to align that with what the company's aspirations are?
If you talk about the visual branding, I mean, visual branding, which is closely tied together with corporate brand identity and employer branding, go hand in hand to a certain extent. Like, you could say that employer branding is like the last youngest little sibling of the family of a brand, right? In that respect, the employer brand cannot really affect the external brand that much. It's the other way around. So the visuals of a corporate brand are super important, but the employer branding department doesn't really have any sort of mandate to change that, especially not on first glance. Like, obviously, once you start peeling off the layers, in the long run, there is something that could be done there. But to answer your question, I mean, visual identity of the corporate brand is vital, like tying that in so that employees feel a certain brand association using visual identity is absolutely key. So when it comes down to things like we do, like events or initiatives or internal campaigns, everything from the merchandise that employees need to or are encouraged to wear or receive within a company sort of become like the walking tokens of this brand. And the more that we can convince through employer branding activities that employees feel association to the corporate brand, the stronger the corporate brand and the employer brand together will become. So very often we find that in major corporations, the sort of employees can't really associate themselves with the end product. And that's usually down to a failed employer brand. And hence it's really important to tie the visuals together in subliminal messaging in all that we do, like things that employees won't necessarily think of, but it's everything from PowerPoints to newsletters to swag and merchandise are important here.
So while you guys are running your campaigns, my other question in this regard would be, how do you guys align yourself with the core values of the company so that in a very realistic way, the brand's identity is reflected in whatever campaigns are there or whatever activities someone's a part of? How does that get factored in?
Very good question. And that question has several answers, but I'm going to give you the answer as to how I think and how I know it should be done as well. It really depends on what campaigns and marketing activities are being done externally for the external brand. So a good employer brand will take the external marketing activities and spin them off to highlight them internally. So let's say there are award shows or a certain specific heritage month being celebrated to highlight and push for a business-related purpose, the external brand. The employer brand needs to feed off of that and do the same thing inwards. So let's say a lot of budgets and money is being pumped into let's take Pride Month as an example. Like a lot of companies focus very heavily on aligning themselves externally as their corporate brand and to show off the fact that they will highlight this, promote it, act as sponsors and allies within the community for various Pride-related activities. And what a lot of companies fail to do is that they fail to face that mirror and turn it inwards and use all those resources that are already being pushed externally to highlight them in again. Because again, by doing so, you create employee advocacy for both external activities that are already being are already taking place and are contributing to a lot of heavy investment towards the company and great sort of positive marketing. But it's also creating employee advocacy so that all of a sudden you have thousands of employees walking around promoting the same activities you are paying a lot of money to push outwards. So it's about aligning the two. And for them to go hand in hand, like the employer branding department at corporations need to, at least to some extent, be aware of planning, strategy, moving forward, what projects are being bet on and what future innovations are in the pipeline to sort of align them to the hiring strategy and the core activities of the employer brand.
Okay, interesting. So after that, once you've established yourself in this role across, different industries, what kind of myths do you think have been busted for you?
Oh, myths. Sorry, it made me laugh. But the sort of thing, maybe the first myth probably being that employer branding only has to do with branding. That's one myth. Depending on the company that you work for or the industry field that you're in within employer branding, employer branding looks very different across multiple organizations, and the setup, the team structure, and the sort of pipelines that employer branding focus on, depending on company A versus company B, are very, very different. So thinking that employer branding sits within the brand and marketing team is pretty much a myth, because hearing the name employer branding specialist, you would assume that perhaps I would be sitting with the brand and creative team or over at external marketing. And at some firms, that is really, that could be true. But mostly, especially in Sweden, where I operate and have been for a few years, employer branding usually looks like it sits within HR, and rightfully so, because it's targeted and its purpose is to attract top talent. That's why employer branding exists, and that's why it's so important. So that would be the first myth, I guess, like what big department employer branding sits in.
Right. And how much of I would say, creative freedom do you guys feel like having in this role?
Feel like actually having and being able to is a very all required three sets of different answers. Firstly, you need creative freedom in order to run employer branding, because
absolutely,
similar to external branding in itself and brand identity is fluid. The the talent that we are attracting is consistently evolving generation by generation, very changes and fluctuates depending on geographical circumstances, background, geopolitical circumstances as well. If we were to ask millennials now what their 5 most important bullet points for picking an employer of choice would be now, if we ask them that question now versus 5 years ago, we would probably get very different answers.
Right.
On that topic, like it is really important to have creative freedom, and it is absolutely vital in order to thrive, for an employer brand to thrive, both for us working and for the corporate brand itself. But we are employer branding, and I think maybe not everywhere, but there also needs to be some limits to that. So there needs to be some set of framework, because once you are working within employer branding for company X or B or Y, you need to have a target in mind. And by target, I mean, so yes, all top talent is of relevance, but we are looking for specific top talent to suit my businesses or this corporation's specific needs. So to streamline all that creative thinking needs to happen, and there needs to be certain framework for that. In terms of visual identity, we have limited creative freedom, and rightfully so, because that is controlled by the external branding activities. And if we didn't have that, then the employer brand would spin off to become something completely different from the external brand, which it shouldn't.
Absolutely. So other than that, I've also talked to a bunch of other co-founders as well, and some of the analysis that I could reiterate here is that it's not a necessary thing that if you create an absolutely beautiful, fully functional product, that everybody will start using it. So that's where I believe marketing comes into the picture, that you properly advertise about the product, that you create a certain awareness about it. Because if somebody doesn't know that a perfect product exists, then how would you actually get your investment back, basically? So in your opinion, how does marketing factor into IT these days? How much companies are trying to push to be popular in the young community as compared to how things had been before?
Very good question. And I think maybe to streamline the question, to focus it down to the nitty gritty, like talking about marketing in general. And yes, I think you're touching base on something that is the lack of marketing within the IT sector or the tech department right now as is. I am agreeing with you in that sense, because I think what we're seeing is innovation is happening quicker and quicker and quicker.
Exactly.
And it's becoming more focused as to businesses targeting their marketing within the industry of tech or IT for that matter. And it sort of stays there. But then if you were to ask a random person on the street, a 25-year-old on the street, what company X does, they'd probably not be able to tell you.
Yeah.
And I think that's a problem, because it ties together with the employer brand. Because what people fail to realize is that it might not be super important for everybody in the country of Sweden to know exactly what this and that company does to the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
But to get a conceptual understanding, which is a marketer's biggest tool and asset, is to shift the narrative. And so companies could use this in their favor, because setting the tone of what is actually being marketed and what they choose to talk about will mean in the long run then, again, back to my field, employee advocacy. Because even though the 25-year-old on the street won't know what this company does to the nitty gritty, it would still mean that once their other friend applies to that company for an R&D position, this particular person that we talk to on the street will still be like, oh my God, yeah, that's so cool. I saw an advert for their space rocket on TV. I'm just, giving a random example.
Of course.
But let's say the space rocket was advertised on TV, or TV obviously being a very predecessor, I guess, and conventional marketing tool, not really used anymore. But let's say that an advert on Instagram or Google Analytics or whatever was being targeted for this specific community with that messaging. it still brings a cool factor. It still brings
Yeah.
curiosity to even people outside of the industry. And that
Yeah.
in the long run creates more like national, global, local awareness of products that are probably pretty hard for a random person to understand that is not in the sector. I mean, my role as a global employer brand, or I mean, as an employer branding specialist for various companies, I very often sit and target my events and initiatives and campaigns for to attract talent to fill positions that when I read the job spec, I have no idea what these people are supposed to be doing for these major tech
Right.
companies.
Yeah.
But I kind of know the minds that need to go behind these individuals that are applying for these jobs. But it is my job to make these scary looking massive companies
Yeah.
seem more approachable and seem more human and seem more fun and attractive, so that all these young talented graduate individuals dare press the apply button, because that's what they need to do. They need to press the apply button. And very often than not, we find that because of the lack of corporate marketing and external marketing, a lot of these talented individuals are almost on the verge of being scared to apply, because it almost feels like a world away. Like these major IT corporations are so far off that they have no association to them. And that's where my job, and as well as external marketing, comes in to shift that narrative.
Right. That's pretty interesting. So if I were to maybe reshape this question a little bit, so now that we talked about employer branding, but now if you were to tie it into a conversation of a personal brand, so how or what would be your recommendation for, let's say, students or early career professional to properly brand themselves so that they can plan their career for whatever their aspirations may be? They can at least brand themselves properly so that they get the right visibility and they gain the right skill set as well. So what's going to be your opinion on that?
Well, my recommendation, and I guess to young, talented, and newly recently graduated individuals setting the foundations for their career, is to really remember that the job market landscape has completely shifted over the past 10 years. It has shifted in the sense that we're looking at in a lot of westernized countries, we're looking at the fact that recruiters and employers alike are starting to seek more individuality in what they're looking for in top candidates. Yes, they are hiring a lot still based on competency. And I'm going to try and answer this question as generic as possible, because of course it really matters what sort of industry you are planning to grow your career in. But on that note, we're looking at individuality can sort of shine through now much more than it could 10 years ago. And on that note, it's very important to sort of care about your personal brand. And we live in this very techy environment these days, with social media and LinkedIn and all of these platforms being sort of like a mirror of who we are, right? And so we kind of need to take pride in all the aspects that is us, right? So a personal brand can have several pages, meaning the identity that you choose to show exclusively on Instagram versus the identity that you choose to showcase on LinkedIn can still be two separate things. You can still be a travel nomad and still a corporate professional and have those both aspects. But what I'm about to say is, like, you can still bring both of those as part of your employer brand, and they can go hand in hand. Whereas back in the day, you obviously have to sort of minimize one aspect of yourself in order to show this very polished exterior. And in order to maintain a personal brand, especially on these social platforms, LinkedIn particularly, I think it's about to let your uniqueness shine through. It's about writing the first three sentences of that intro being not just I'm a positive, hardworking individual, but write two sentences that make you you. What is it about? I mean, and I'm not that, like, there's probably 500,000 other great employer branding specialists. I'm just one of many. But to highlight For example, the fact that I would speak several languages, that I have a mixed background, that I have another cultural appreciation and understanding of major corporations is something that is seen as a competitive advantage in my personal brand. Like the fact that I have ventured through employer branding through a variety of industries is also something that I can see as advantageous. Whereas 10 years ago, a recruiter probably would have told me, why did you do that? How did you suddenly just switch industries, even though you were supposed to do this, right? So the personal brand doesn't have to be so square and so polished. It's about really sticking out to a recruiter, especially as they're hunting and using CEO to optimize their searching. It's thinking about the keywords that are being popped out there and really things that are going to, the algorithm is going to push you upward. So getting that conceptual understanding of it's not so much about what you choose to portray in your personal brand, but how you choose to do that. And remembering that uniqueness now is more important than ever. And it's really going to distinguish you in this very harsh job market reality that we're sitting at.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if you were to talk about the employer for a second here, so although we understand that there's a lot of competition in the market for even one job position, there are several candidates. But even for the companies, I think it's getting a lot more competitive to retain talent as well, because their competitors might be offering something totally different that might attract people towards them instead of whatever they might be offered in terms, speaking purely from a technical standpoint. So in that regard, how are these companies of recent times positioning themselves so that they can not only attract the talent, but they can retain it as well?
I think you're asking a super fantastic question, and I can talk about this for minutes on end because it's so important. Okay. A lot of companies, unfortunately, focus employer branding solely on attracting. And the problem by doing that is that you lure people into a room, right? And you offer them candy on the way, and you're like, hey, come here, I have plenty more candy if you just walk into this door. And then they shut the door and they're like, here you go, here's your computer, here's 8 hours, here's a great salary, shut up and just run with it.
Right.
Sorry, I'm laughing, but it's
no, of course.
And the truth is that today people of our generation within this generation, the millennial and the generation that's coming after us, we don't really care. Like, we care more about what happens inside that room once we've been lured in, because we're getting all these other random employers offering us probably better pay or greater benefits. And a lot of the private sector within a lot of industries are luring candidates in, offering stability, offering competitive advantages, salaries, bonuses, healthcare benefits, things globally. I mean, not just in Northern America or in Central Europe, but just literally everywhere. However, we're seeing that the average tenure in tech, especially in tech, is somewhere between 2 and 2.5 years. And that's very short. If you think about, if that is the average meridian of how long an employee actually stays within a company, considering the amount of money being invested in them, and for the purpose of them to retain that talent so that they stay, innovate the business, continue to create greater expenditure for the company, and there is obviously a return of investment following. Right. You don't really get to the point of return of investment if an employee leaves within 2 years. Like, it literally takes them about 6 months to even get comfortable with what it is that they're doing. And if we add in the topic of the fact that a lot of recent young graduates, as I'm sure you and I can relate to as well, the first 3 months is basically imposter syndrome. You're walking around a massive company and you're thinking, what am I even doing here? So all that time is almost wasted because companies forget that culture, creating a safe space, embracing diversity, focusing on the employee needs, like, and I use this metaphor as, offering kids candy and luring them into a room, right? But
Yeah.
if we were to think of ourselves as kids, and if somebody just locked that door and then nothing was happening in that room, we weren't
Yeah.
playing, there were no Legos, there was nothing
Yeah.
in there, we would probably scream and get bored and leave after
Exactly.
a while, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we'd be
Absolutely.
like, right, now
Yeah.
what? What's happening? I'm not
Yeah.
really stimulated. And the truth is
Yeah.
that millennials and the generation to come after us, we've started realizing the happiness in life is probably not the highest salary. It's everything that comes around it, right? So it's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
work dynamics, it's the
Yeah.
management, it's the culture, and
Yeah.
culture needs to come organically from within a company. There are plenty of amazing companies that do this really well. They focus heavily on keeping this talent in terms of health and wellness initiatives, in terms of mindfulness, in terms of heart and soul initiatives for
Yeah.
mental health week, in terms of highlighting, for example, neurodiversity, in terms of highlighting diversity in general, celebrating specific minority heritages months, creating internal events and structure that sort of keep people coming, to sort of bridge this gap between what is work and what is life, and creating really
Yeah.
this natural work-life balance where employees can come to work Monday through Friday and don't really feel like they really need to leave at 5
Yeah.
p.m., you know, that they naturally just want to stay and catch up with another colleague or
Yeah.
put in an extra hour because the company has created this really warm and playful environment. And it's important to remember also, and science sort of supports this, that human beings, we kind of also need to play. Like, it's not just about work, 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 because that doesn't necessarily fuel innovation. Innovation comes from when adults are allowed to sort of let their hair down, to have a FIFA tournament at work, or play ping pong for 25 minutes, or have a dance battle, or, you know, just
Yeah.
try
Yeah.
something different. And I think with major international corporations, what we're seeing within the industry is, for a lot of expats that are moving from countries due to the requirements of a certain company, for example, they are transitioning and then staying often longer with companies that offer more of an internal employer brand, a stronger internal employer brand, because that is
Right. Yeah.
that is usually maybe the only connection to a geographical location that they have. It's work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if
I mean, again, if I
yeah.
were to reflect on that as well, I think building a mutual understanding is very important, not just from an employee that, you know, there is this problem for the company that they need to solve, but also for the employer to understand and cater to their needs as well. Like, for example, I don't think any human being can function in a way that you're pounded with work 8 hours constantly without taking a break, you know, just work, 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 meeting after meeting. I think it's very important for employers lately to understand and be perceptive to these needs as well, where employees can be the best version of themselves. And in turn, I think that's the best indicator for companies to be successful, or to be their success metric, I would say.
Exactly. And I definitely think you're spot on there, because if employers start focusing more on this, they will, and studies have shown this, that a more a resilient workforce is then the product of that. Like, you will have a lot less employees being burnt out at work. You will have a lot less sickness rates. You will have a longer average tenure by creating an office, a work environment that is fun, it's innovative, it strives to sort of improve, and it highlights diversity where people can come to work just as they are. They don't need to sort of fit this very strict stereotype. And that in itself, together with a lot of employee-led initiatives, builds culture from within.
Talking to you as a person, what kind of core values do you uphold in your life that has led you to success?
Good question. I am very persistent, extremely persistent, and I always like to sort of take an old way of doing something and never doing it that way.
Yeah.
I strongly believe in letting go of projects that are not serving you, regardless of emotional attachment to them, and then just moving on and spinning off on a new ball, you know. to innovate and dare to risk it. I think in my field of work within employer branding and branding in general, dare risk it, dare do something that's different. You don't necessarily have to have the data or the science to back up the crazy idea that popped into your head about creating an event for 400 employees, for example, just because it's fun, because you won't know the outcome until you actually try. And I do really believe that is the core values that have led me to where I am today. I was very young when I walked into some of my first roles, and I remember I spent the first 3 months walking around those offices in Stockholm thinking like, what am I doing here? Why did they hire me? And then I'm like, maybe I am not as bad as I think I am. So really trusting your own gut is so important. And in this field of work, really dare to be different, because that's what's gonna push you in your career. That's what's pushed me. And I'm not even 30 yet, but luckily I've done some really cool things, which I'm very proud of. I still have a long way to go, but as long as I'm having fun on the way and I'm learning all the time, at least I'm doing something right, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure. And honestly, it was really great to have this conversation with you. Now that we're heading towards the end of our conversation, let's end it on a note that knowing what you know now, what do you think you would have done differently?
A few years back, or?
In journal, I guess. I mean, maybe reflecting upon your college time and then now. So if you were to be a student again, what would you have done differently?
Oh, that was a very good question. The only thing I would have done differently back in college or at university is I wouldn't have messed up one of my last essays, because that gave me a B, and then I would have gotten an A, and that still to this day really bothers me. But it costed me. It costed me, instead of a first class degree, it costed me. So I landed with a 2-1. But I could also add that lecturer really did not like me. So if he does watch this at some point, that's a shout out to him. But no, that was a joke. But I mean, in truth, I wouldn't have done anything differently, because I think there's no point at a certain point in life looking back and say, oh shit, I wish I would have taken this path or that path.
Right.
If I look back now, I couldn't be happier than I am now. And I think everything sort of panned out for a reason. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, I thought I was going to be a wedding planner. I had no idea I was going to become an employer branding specialist. Little did I know. Yeah. And here I am, years later, always had this passion for brand and brand identity and that whole conceptual understanding in academia of branding, and doing something that I didn't even know existed when I graduated. I didn't even know what an employer branding specialist was. So I wouldn't have done anything differently, I guess, is the real answer to that.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't really put a price tag on a life full of fulfillment and discoveries along the way. So with that, we'll let you go. Tiffany, thank you very much for having a very insightful conversation with us. As far as our audience are concerned, if you like the content, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And until the next episode rolls out, take care of yourself and stay tuned. Thank you. Bye.